Hey everyone, welcome to PunkCast. My name is William Maxwell. I'm a student of Web3 and the owner of Punk2772. CryptoPunks are 10,000 uniquely generated characters stored permanently on the Ethereum blockchain. No punk is the same. This is a show dedicated to celebrating the punks behind the punk. My hope for this podcast is that we capture the essence of the punk culture, elevate the brand and the individual behind the punk. One last thing. Projects discussed on the show is not financial advice. Crypto and NFTs are a volatile and risky asset class. Please always do your own research. Other than that, let's go. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of PunkCast. Today we've got Punk2772. She's a 4 Atty with attitude, rocking an earring, clown green eyes, black lipstick, and an iconic blue bandana. In real life, he is an avid art collector and the founder of Frahm.art, a Metaverse frame maker, and also a member of Punk DAO/Punk Ventures. Please welcome a friend of mine, Mr. Artus Van Frahm, to the show. Artus, welcome. How are you?
Doing great. Hey, Maxwell. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate being here today.
Nice to finally speak, man. I think we've been crossing paths on Twitter and also on various sort of discords, in particular sort of Punk DAO and Punk Ventures. Nice to sort of finally connect with you.
Yeah, likewise. I think it's always fascinating when you interact with pretty much anybody in the crypto NFT space, right? And you see each other in these various instances and places, and eventually you like jump on a call, put a face to it, get to know somebody better, and that's always a very interesting experience. And to be honest, each time after I met somebody, I'm like, wow, there's so many great people involved in that space, and that's really where you realize that something is going to happen here.
Totally. And I sort of feel like punks don't really leverage that to their full benefit and advantage as well, right? But yeah, it's definitely something we can definitely go into. But I thought maybe just to start us off slowly, maybe if you can just introduce how you got to your name, Artus Van Frahm, as your handle.
Sure. So when we started building Frahm, I guess I talk about that in a bit later, I was thinking about with what kind of persona do I want to represent that project. And like years before, it has always been on my mind to be out there with a pseudonymous account, particularly after seeing punks and like PFPs being used on Twitter. So that's the first decision where it was like, okay, I want to be one of these punks with my punk, which I owned at that time already. And when I was just thinking about a name, might sound superficial, but Artus, the meaning of Artus in Latin is frame. And with Frahm, we're doing frames, right? So that makes sense. Sounds kind of nice. It's short. Yeah, and that's how that name came to be.
Nice. And mate, like, why don't you share a little bit of background about yourself? Like, where you sort of based, where you grew up, and what ultimately led you along the path of, Web3 and NFTs.
Yeah. So I'm originally from Germany, south of Germany. I live in Stuttgart, and I grew up in China, Beijing for a while. So I actually graduated from high school over there. I attended the German embassy school in Beijing, which was a very unique experience. And I think it shaped a lot of my future life to come, just being in China. I also studied Chinese Mandarin afterwards in university over there. And that's also how everything kind of connects to me being here today and how I entered that crypto space. Some of my best friends I met over there, I lived with them, 4 Irish brothers, a family of Irish men who basically grew up in China as well. And we stayed close ever since I left China. I think in 2016, one of them messaged me, he's like, yo, you got to check out that Ethereum thing, that cryptocurrency. I was like, what is that? It's the future, he said. I'm like, all right, let me check it out. And yeah, that's basically how I got started. I think it was January 2016, and it was putting money down into ETH without really knowing what ETH is, cryptocurrency. I think my first experience with cryptocurrency was with Bitcoin when I was still in university, and my roommate was a frequent customer of certain darknet marketplaces. But really, I got hooked into the system with Ethereum in 2016, and that was, I think, a great start into experience kind of everything building from the ground up when it came to smart contract platforms.
I used to live in China as well. I was in Shanghai for a couple of years for work, and it sounded like you were there in the early days before it even really took off in its peak heyday, right? So, I guess how did you find your way into China? That's kind of a random place from being German, right?
Yeah, and I think you're right. Like we moved there with our whole family in 2004, and that was still when there was not that many foreigners living in Beijing, and it was still like heavily being developed. And at that point, like the streets of Beijing, you would see like many VWs, Santanas, like these old cars, right? And like the majority of people would ride bicycles. Nowadays, it's a complete different scene. But yeah, I mentioned I come from Stuttgart, south of Germany. That's the home for uh, Porsche as well as Mercedes Benz. And my dad used to
Mm,
work at Mercedes Benz basically his whole life. He was involved as an architect in building construction sites. And in 2004, Mercedes Benz started to build the first factories to
mm,
produce cars
yeah.
locally in China for that market. And yeah, he got involved in that project. It was pretty much our first time also moving abroad. At that point, I was 17. I wasn't really into it. I mean, I had a circle of friends and I was having a good time here. So I was like, yeah. And I wasn't really like world open at that point in time. So I didn't want to go, but then we moved and then I didn't want to leave. So actually, they left by themselves and I stayed there. And that's where I kept on living with these four Irish guys and the Irish family I mentioned before.
That's crazy. And so how's your Mandarin? Is it still quite fluent today?
I would say it's all right, but it's not getting any better. I mean, yeah, I used to use it every now and then, but nowadays, yeah, it's getting less and less. And you know how it is with like foreign languages, you need to really practice it to keep it up. And I do regret it every now and then. I'm like, man, I should try and keep it up, particularly also writing characters, the simplified characters. I used to, when I think about how much time in my life I spent learning how to write Chinese and how quickly that kind of vanishes, particularly writing, right? It's like an own art in itself. Yeah, but I would say it's all right.
Yeah. I mean, so when was I there? I think I was in Shanghai in 2012. And it felt like that was sort of the peak of when, there was a lot of activity from foreign companies that were investing heavily in China. And so, you were going out to clubs and bars and it was full of expats. It was a really good vibe. I remember actually even going to Beijing on some weekends as well. I think, do you remember Sanlitan?
Yeah, many memories in that bar street.
Yeah.
And there used to be even a like original Sanlitun bar street, which was basically demolished in the development of Beijing working towards the Olympics in 2008. And 2008 for me is always kind of that like reference mark when, to me personally, China really opened up and changed. I think particularly also that was true for Beijing because that was the first time when all eyes were on Beijing and the city, and so many foreigners came into that city in particular. But yeah, there was this old Sanlitun bar street, which was legendary, and that whole area basically got demolished and redone in wake of the Olympics.
Crazy. So what made you stay? So your parents went back to Germany and you ended up staying in Beijing. What did you stay there to study or what were you sort of doing?
I think one main reason was I wanted to finish high school over there. So I think 12th grade, and in German high school in that system, you would have 13th grade at that time. So I wanted to finish school over there, but I also wasn't really ready to move back. So at that time, that project my dad was working on finished and completed. So they moved back, and I decided I want to finish high school here and then study Chinese afterwards. Started studying Chinese in high school, and I liked it. I was good at it. Wasn't really a role model student, but I like Chinese, and I could apply it living there, so that was pretty cool. And yeah, then when my neighbors, the Irish family, basically heard that my parents are moving back, they were, yeah, you can stay with us. We already have four sons. Another one, why not? Yeah, was a great time. I really miss it actually.
Nice. And getting a perspective from China being sort of a closed country versus the stuff that we're seeing on with crypto now as well must have been a real eye opener. Talk to us a little bit more around how you discovered, I guess Bitcoin and then found your way into Ethereum. What was the key thing that really stood out for you to explore and go deeper and down rabbit holes? And I know you sort of mentioned that one of the Irish brothers sort of told you it's the future, but what made you sort of want to invest a little bit more time going a little bit deeper?
To be honest, at that beginning, it was pretty much just taking the word from my friend, where I'm like, normally he's one of those persons who is good at finding these trends, and I was like, okay, if you say that, I will try and put some money into it. So it was purely driven by an investment perspective, and at that point, pulling the trigger without doing too much homework, really, which in this case, it played out well. In other cases, it didn't play out so well. But yeah, the Irish brothers, or two of them in particular, they were at that point living in Thailand, and they were involved in the SEOing industry, search engine optimization, and affiliate marketing. And I think that particularly kind of industry, they had a much more early exposure to using Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies for their business, doing international transactions more easily. But I think also Bangkok was sort of a hub for that community in particular, where people could realize, hey, we do remote only work. It's an attractive place to live, low living cost, tax situation is good, and you can really use digital currency in that respect. So I think they had that kind of sense for the industry. And yeah, my experience started with trying to figure out how to actually acquire ETH at that point in January 2016. I think Ethereum, basically the blockchain, just launched a couple of months before that, end of 2015, right? And in Germany, where there was this kind of local peer-to-peer exchange called Bitcoin.de, where I would need to go and figure out, okay, how to acquire Bitcoin. And then after I acquired Bitcoin, I would need to send them to a crypto wallet on Poloniex. And some people still remember Poloniex. I think it was one of the big shitcoin exchanges in the early days. I think it actually got acquired by even Circle. I'm not sure if I'm right a couple years later, but then sold again. Maybe I'm mixing that up. But yeah, it was legendary, and I think that it had that feature called the troll box, where just had a good time, like being on that exchange and watching what people write in the troll box. But yeah, that whole experience of kind of, okay, how do I interact with crypto wallets and sending these or sending digital currencies from wallet to wallet was kind of like an eye-opening experience for me, and a big learning process, right? And I think one thing we knew already at that point in time was that don't keep your crypto on exchanges, keep your own keys and hold your own crypto. And this is when, after acquiring some ETH, I figured out, okay, there's this wallet called Mist Wallet. I think it was the first Ethereum wallet developed by the Ethereum Foundation. Yeah, I had it. I downloaded it to my MacBook Pro, and I think at that point it was still a full node, so you needed to run a full node every time you opened the wallet, so it crashed my MacBook half of the time. And yeah, that's how that whole journey started, pretty much.
So are you like naturally technical? Like, are you more from a technical sort of background, do you think?
Not really. So my educational background is in business development and MBA, but I started my professional career with a German technology company. So I was always working in technical sales and product management, different stages on technical products, where there was always a level of like technical expertise required, but you needed to like dive in. I mean, I understand kind of high level how coding works. Did a few courses, but yeah, I'm not a developer myself, so that was definitely also a unique but also interesting, challenging for me to learn about decentralized networks, blockchain technology, public key infrastructure, and everything kind of relating to that, and like all these different components enabling that technology at the end of the day. And that's the thing fascinates me till today.
You bought some ETH using the Mist wallet and found your way through that in the early days. So you're like a super OG when it comes to sort of Ethereum. Talk to us about your NFT journey then. Like, what was your first NFT and how did you sort of find your way into the space?
So NFTs, to like, I properly dived into NFTs only in 2021, really. But my first NFT purchases were, it was in 2017, it was a CryptoKitty, or if you regard ENS domains as an NFT, I don't know if people really classify that as an NFT, but yeah, I pretty much, as soon as ENS launched and you could register some ENS names, I started registering a few names. And yeah, CryptoKitties was pretty much, I was playing around with the mobile wallets existing at that time. And I think that the one I was using was called Toshi, and that is Coinbase wallet today. I think they rebranded eventually, but that was like my experience of kind of finding dApps to play around with. Because at that point in time, right, there was not too many like decentralized applications really existed, and I always used to check that stats overview site, I think it was called. Not sure what the name was, but it was basically an overview of different development statuses of different applications, like decentralized applications. You could always jump in and discover kind of, okay, what are people actually building on Ethereum? And through that, I kind of played around with a bunch of apps, and yeah, CryptoKitties was one of the first NFT purchases, but I didn't really like dug into CryptoKitties and that collection and that whole project on a deeper level, but rather just, okay, let me buy that cat and see if it works, and I actually can buy it. But so it's pretty valueless, but I still keep it.
And what was your thought process at the time? Was it just a more of experimental? At what point did NFTs become a real interest and of potentially real valuable assets for you?
That pretty much only happened in 2021 when I acquired my punk. And I've seen punks in 2017 when the project was launching. So like back in that day, as I mentioned before, I was kind of curious, always trying to find what people are building, what are new projects, and was frequently, or my main information source back in the day was on Reddit, r Ethereum and r ETH Trader. I think those used to be great places. Probably they are still today, not frequent anymore. But yeah, I saw Punk's launch, and at that point in time, I didn't really make much of it. And it was only in 2021 when I was seeing like a lot of OGs or people I knew or respected as builders, traders, or collectors in the space, like started using Punks as their PFP. And at that point, something is going on here. Looks like I need to figure that out and dive into it. And really, it was only at that time when I started to take NFTs more serious. I mean, before I did see NFT Top Shots and other projects launch and also see them take off, but I still didn't really go serious into it. I think I was one of that people at that time where I thought, okay, that seems like a funny little trend, like a toy, but didn't take it serious. And I think as it turns out with so many other applications, like most of them, they do start out looking like toys or something.
Yeah. So basically, you bought your punk in 2021. And the reason why you bought your punk was, I guess, you started seeing some pretty big names, rocking punks as profile pictures, and you sort of felt like that was the profile picture you had to get to fit in with the cool kids. Like, how were you sort of thinking about the need for a punk?
I mean, that was really my trigger to learn more about punks and look into, okay, why are people using them as a PFP, and why in particular is it CryptoPunks? And then was a few days of digging into it and okay, understanding kind of NFTs as digital assets, or NFTs as basically token standard for any kind of representing digital asset as a new standard of applying that whole technology in a broader space, but also particularly looking at kind of the whole digital art space as a bigger category on top of that, where then you come back to looking, okay, Punks is really the innovator in that space who enabled and pushed forward that whole movement. Yeah, that sold it for me pretty much. So at that point, I was like, okay, I will acquire a Punk. And I mean, at that point, they were also not cheap anymore, right? I think they had a big run already. I think it was 20 ETH around that, which with ETH price at that level amounted to something like 40K USD. So it was not an insignificant amount where I said, okay, I'm going to buy a punk, but I felt comfortable.
Yeah. And so maybe let's talk about your current Punk 2772. That I'm assuming this is the one that you bought first and you still hold it. What was your, I guess, your thinking around traits and attributes when you were selecting and looking for a punk? And how did you arrive at 2772?
So I did browse the collection, and I didn't go on a deeper level in trying to become a expert on like traits and how to value traits. It was more of a, I would say, aesthetic choice to choose that punk in particular. And I mean, I was on a certain budget where I was like, okay, it's going to be a floor punk. And my wife has a good sense for aesthetics. She's responsible for the feng shui here in our house. So it looks pretty good. And she's more involved in like the traditional art space, but basically I got her involved and was like, look, here's the ETH we have available to purchase a punk. Which punk of these punks would you go with? Without really knowing anything about punks or trades or anything like that. And that's the punk she picked.
Nice. No, she's a beautiful punk. The blue bandana still is a very iconic trait, right? I think who was that? I think it was 4156. The punk ape with the blue bandana was a pretty big one before he sort of sold it anyway. But it's very iconic and very clean. Your punk too. So I think it's a good choice.
Yeah, I personally like it, and I think even if it was a other punk, I think you grow kind of fond of it, right? Particularly when you use it as your profile picture and you start to identify with, but also other NFTs or like artworks you collect, and I think they grow on you over time. And particularly with my punk, I fear the day I will have to sell it, and my plan is to never sell it. Like ideally, I will be able to pass it on to the next generation. So it really is my forever punk. Hopefully, I'll be able to acquire some more in the future. But yeah, I do enjoy it.
Did you have any experience collecting art prior to NFTs? Like, were you buying art in the traditional sense?
I didn't. So that was my start of my journey into collecting digital art and getting involved in the digital art ecosystem. My wife, she is a art collector and actually gallery owner. So she has a PhD in history of art. So since I've been together with her, which is a good decade now, I have had constant exposure to traditional art, and like the place we live is full of art. We even store art left and right in every storage space we have available in this place here. But this is also when you realize that, hey, there's actually more benefits to owning digital art. Like there's infinite shelf and storage place, and like most of the art pieces we have here at home, like they're packed away pretty much. But yeah, so this is where my kind of exposure to art in general comes from with my wife. And it was only with acquiring that punk when I, as mentioned, took that whole movement more serious. And I think from there, I then started to dive into generative art as a first really interesting segment for me, where I was like, wow, okay, punks, they are generative in their essence. And that led me to exploring generative art as a digital native medium, right, to create art. And I think that is fascinating to myself as well. And my co-founder at Frahm, he's a passionate generative artist, so that's still fascinating to me.
Nice. Maybe before we get on to talk about From, just what was it like telling your wife that came from a traditional art world that you wanted to buy a picture for $40,000 back then? What's her take on the NFT space?
I mean, she was also in a place where she ridiculed it in a certain way, right? But I think when it came to making investment decisions and digital currencies in particular, I think at that time I had proved a bit of a track record with her when she knew, okay, like he's not a complete idiot when it comes to that. So, okay, why don't you go ahead? So for her, it was definitely also a learning journey. And in many ways, she still kind of reflects more the traditional art space. Also, when I talk to her about what's going on and everything that's happening, she sees the potential. She likes it. And I think she's particularly one of these persons. She's like owns a traditional gallery and one of those people in a place who can facilitate kind of that transition to bring more and more mainstream people into that space as well.
Yeah, gotcha. Nice. Hopefully, you can find a way to convert her into buying her own punk one day too. I'd love to sort of see her floating around. But
It's the plan.
so moving on to, I guess, Frahm.art, what was the inspiration for you to, kick off that project in that business?
So that actually came to be through discussions my wife and I had about, okay, how would you actually showcase NFTs in the physical world, right? And thinking about digital frames, and like she with her gallery collaborates with a traditional frame maker, like a 60-year-old German passionate frame maker who's been doing that for like 30 to 40 years, who like builds custom frames and frames artworks, paintings for people coming into that gallery. And when we're talking about that, we made that kind of leap forward to say, hey, what about frames in the virtual world? When you look at how we showcase digital art today in these metaverse galleries like On Cyber, Spatial, Mona, or any other where, frames are really not a valued object, or they're definitely underrepresented. And this is how the idea came to be that, hey, in the future, we think that the digital art movement and how we experience digital art will evolve dramatically, and it will only make sense to add premium frames, custom frames, nice frames in those experiences. And yeah, from that seed of an idea is basically where I said, okay, let's start looking into that. And that's how that journey started, which was like end of 2021.
Nice. And could you talk to us a little bit about some? I'm browsing the screen now, so I think you've got like a Genesis drop, which is literally a actual frame visually, but then you'd have to connect to your website to really view it. Could you sort of explain, I guess, your different products and how you're sort of thinking through that?
Yeah, so we started exploring kind of that whole space by thinking about, okay, let's just try to create digital frames, or in that sense, now when I talk about digital frames, I mean virtual frames, 3D objects. Digital frame is a 3D object. We said we want to try to bring kind of this traditional sense of craftsmanship from, when you look at frames historically, there were so many eras where you had really magnificent frames made from wood and different materials, particularly kind of like the Renaissance and like the Baroque era, where frames were really like a piece of art in their own kind of respect. I think in like contemporary art and like in the modern day, you tend to be more and more minimalist with that frame in many senses. And we wanted to kind of try an experiment of bringing that craftsmanship into that virtual world and interpret it in a new way and what that could mean. And I mentioned before that my co-founder at Frahm, Lucas Wick, generativeartist.com, he's like, yeah, let's try to build a digital frame collection based on generative art. And that was our Genesis drop, where we said, hey, let's do it. Let's think something compelling, something innovative, where we try to think about that medium from a new perspective. And yeah, that's when we launched our Genesis it was end of April in 2022. So we're almost at 1 year today. And yeah, there's a collection of digital frames, and they're all based on a generative art script Lucas wrote. I think it's a pretty cool collection. When we launched, I think the bear market already started to hit a little bit, and digital frames are definitely back then and now a very niche segment. I think not too many people in that space know that we exist and what we are trying to accomplish, but I hope we get there.
Yeah, no, it's cool. And what's next for From then? Like, where would you like to sort of be in the next few years?
So when we started with Frahm, and like the main focus at the beginning was really trying to do a collection, an NFT collection based on generative art, and really establishing the first digital frames we create as a sort of artwork in itself. And from there, we developed kind of a bigger vision for what we want to accomplish with Frahm. And that is really to be the metaverse frame maker and build up a new category in the digital art space, establishing proper premium digital frames and custom frames in the digital art experience. And when I think about kind of the vision and where we want to be, is that like eventually, if you want to add a custom frame to your on cyber gallery, to your spatial gallery, your Mona gallery, wherever in any metaverse or digital art experience, you can get that at Frahm. Ideally, we are natively integrated with an API one way or another into these platforms. So a reference model for this kind of path is Ready Player Me. It's a platform for 3D avatars. And when you look into like these metaverse spaces or games and galleries, a lot of them integrated. So I think that's a very compelling example and role model for like my vision at Frahm to be kind of a horizontally integrated platform where we can set a certain like standard for framing in the metaverse. But that is kind of like a bit out, I think, at this point. So we're building our own platform. The integrations will be a core part of it, but right now our main focus is on building what we call our own frame development kit, the FDK. So this is what we use ourselves to build our own digital frames. So we're building all our frames from scratch, basically, and we're building a toolbox based on generative art to really leverage and be able to scale custom frames in the metaverse. And with that, we have another platform or service we're just rolling out, which is called Frahm Galleries. If you check Frahm Galleries, it's kind of our own way of enabling anybody to showcase their art in a different way and a different, unique way. By that, I mean kind of having a focus on really premium close ups in a 3D environment. So it's not 3D in the sense of I am in a metaverse and walk around it, but 3D in the sense that I can zoom in, I can move the artwork and look into it, and we basically put it in custom frames. And these are kind of the two core products we're building at that moment is the FDK and the galleries, and they go well together. We obviously want to integrate that you can build a custom frame, use them in the gallery. That's what we're releasing with one of the next product releases over the next couple of weeks. So both products are pretty much in an alpha state at this point in time.
That's cool. So basically, just having a look at it now. So basically, it's like a different way to showcase your personal art collection, but going in there, selecting frames, and then attaching your NFTs to it and visualizing it within sort of the Frahm sort of art gallery, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, exactly. And you can build custom frames easily yourself with the FDK. And these frames you can then use in the galleries we provide, but the frame itself is a 3D asset, a GLB file, and that you can also easily import and use in spaces like on cyber or spatial even today. And yeah, this is basically kind of the product roadmap where we are and where we're going. There's still, I think, a lot of work to do and many avenues potentially to explore. I mean, we're still a small team at that point in time. We need to really focus our resources and our energy. But beyond that, there's some, I think, interesting things we're doing in addition. I think one project we are currently working on and hopefully launching soon is with a really cool artist together, Artur, who mainly does kind of like one-on-one art. And he wants to launch like his first bigger edition. But for that bigger edition, he also doesn't want to just have 250 or whatever the number is copies of that same image. He wants to kind of mix it up. And this is where we are providing him with 250 custom frames. So each piece that has a different frame, and the frames itself, they have kind of a rarity distribution where you have like different frame styles and different materials. Where, for example, some have a gold material, some have avians feature, and this is how you push rarities into that edition. So I think this is going to be a pretty cool experiment also in that space to see if there's a new cooler way to do editions instead of just dropping the same one in many times.
Mm. How do you like experiencing your existing art collection at the moment? I mean, your NFTs and browsing and viewing them. And do you actually have a physical sort of screens that you also view at home, or are you sort of just purely digital, like in terms of how you like to browse your own collection?
At this point in time, it's purely digital, and I did have set up on Cyber Gallery and Spatial, Gallery SO, Deca, and I like to play around. And I mean, that's the beauty of digital art and NFTs, that you're not really bound to just one place in time, similar to the physical space. You can look at and experience your art in many different ways at the same time. So I'm still trying to convince my wife to get a proper digital screen at home. That hasn't happened yet. Our wall space is pretty occupied at that point in time. Maybe in the future. But yeah, and I think, when it comes to digital art, that's why I also like what we are doing with Frahm, that with our own gallery platform, it's kind of another way to enrich the possible experience space for digital art, but also with the frames where we can contemplate pretty much all of the existing experiences in another kind of high-end and premium way.
That's cool. And so, talking about your collections, then, like in this sort of bear market at the moment, are you looking at any particular collections to buy, or are you sort of net holding or net exiting?
So currently, I would say I'm monitoring and holding. I mean, punks is definitely top of mind when it comes to, okay, if there's any NFT, which is a goal where I want to acquire more of, um, punks is definitely up there. There's a few other segments I want to get more involved in. I think one-on-one art, particularly starting to explore that in a more profound way, as well as AI based art is something on my mind. But for that, you also need to really, personally, I like to take time to really dive in and explore that, and that is currently something I need to free up one way or another. Yeah, I have a little daughter, so together with Bram and my wife, still trying to run her own gallery. We really need to channel the energy here.
Absolutely. It does get a little bit challenging trying to keep an eye across all these collections. There's so many different options at the moment.
Definitely.
And if you were to look back across your NFT career to date, are there sort of any, wins or losses worth mentioning?
So over the last days, I started preparing my tax report for 2021 and 2022. So I have, there's definitely some losses. I don't want anything to really stand out and mention it, but I think, when I think about the point in time when I really started to go onto my NFT journey, that was also a bit of the vibrant NFT bull market in 2021, right? I think Punk I bought in was March or April in 2021. And from that, I think the whole space had a good run. And I think the NFT space, but in general, also like the crypto space, were very bullish at that point in time. And this is when I really started, as mentioned before, to get into generative art and exploring that whole space, and exploring kind of, okay, I can mint on art blocks, and what is the experience like to mint a project here. I also got involved in some Gen Art DAOs. One is Gen.art, which I really like, and that's also how I met my co-founder today, Lucas Swick. I think they also had their own kind of unique challenges now with the bear market. But yeah, just being there and acquiring and diving into many different collections and buying digital art, there were definitely a lot of them bought on kind of the top of the market. But myself, I'm not a trader really. More of, okay, I want to buy something with conviction and hold that for a longer time period. Potentially sell it some, such as my punk. I don't want to sell us my Chromie squiggles I own. I also don't want to sell really. Yeah, so I'm not really looking at that as losses. But if you would take the current market value of many of these purchases and benchmark them against the principal capital I deployed, it's not looking too good.
I think that's pretty reminiscent of most of us in the space. So you're not alone. And if you were to look across, I guess, the punk community, do you have like a favorite punk personality that comes to mind?
Such a hard question, because there's so many great personalities, right? And the different spectrum of a lot of great personalities. I can't really say this is the one. I mean, you have kind of the bigger accounts who rocking their punks as PFP, I think, who have a lot of reach. I think DC Investor is one where, as mentioned before, when I kind of dived into Ethereum and blockchain, R Ethereum on Reddit and R ETH Trader were my number one kind of sources for information and learning about that space. And he was very active in those Reddits back in the day. So he's definitely one where I'm very fond of just also following his journey from the very beginning and kind of grown into where he is today. So I think that was pretty exciting to kind of witness. Then again, there's many other great punks, some with, lesser known, but also when I look at what you mentioned before, PunkDAO, where we are involved, there are certain individuals who are like great builders and have a great understanding for the market, but also on a technical way. Like, give a shout out to Arcadius. I think he's pretty fascinating, and I had the chance to also briefly meet him and a lot of other punks at NFT Paris at the Punks branch. And pretty amazing when you meet so many great people in one space at the same time, and like the conversations you have, pretty mind blowing when you think about the punk community and kind of the capabilities of people in that community. I think it's definitely one of like the premier networks, not just in the digital art space, but if you think about, okay, what's like traditional kind of membership clubs, right, where you also have like benefits of being a member in that sort of club. And I think when you would compare that, punks is up there.
Yeah, I gotta say, Arcadius is a pretty special individual. I think he's super talented, right? He's just done so much. I think he was like the main dev for Squiggle DAO as well, and just being able to give us some insights around how that sort of operation works. I need to get him on PunkCast actually, so that's a good reminder. But yeah, and obviously you mentioned Punk DAO and Punk Ventures. Yeah, I mean the talent that we sort of have in there is pretty crazy. I mean, Aaron Wright, who was a lawyer, sort of created sort of Tribute Labs, and which was the genesis of Flamingo DAO and all these DAOs that sort of really started this whole wave of sophisticated crypto, communal investing, right? And I think to some extent we're still trying to figure what that actually is and how we coordinate. But I think it's definitely an interesting experiment, and more importantly, it's cutting edge. And to your point, I think punk's at the forefront of those things. And if you were to describe punk culture in a few words, how would you describe that?
I think to me personally, punk culture and what I associate with it is really reflecting original values of what blockchain, crypto, particularly kind of Ethereum stand for and where they come from. And that is decentralization, digital self sovereignty, a new primitive in a digital infrastructure for that world where individuals can transact freely with each other, where you have kind of a peer-to-peer global commerce platform, basically, which is a new technical infrastructure for the world to openly engage with each other, which is not owned by like a single service provider or a single monopoly who makes the rules and is able to manipulate it and is able to censor it. So for me, in a way, and as mentioned before, kind of where I come from with my experience, this is what punks, particularly punks meaning people rocking a punk as a PFP and representing themselves as a punk. This is what like is important to me. But beyond that, I think punk culture in general is also evolving. I think what is definitely there is also that the pioneership for innovating NFTs and digital art and assets as a new medium, applying blockchain technology and digital ownership to that, and representing kind of this leap forward and new paradigm shift in how we transact digital objects as well. But definitely also with it being like the first PFP collection or digital art collection, a pioneer in the digital art space itself.
That's very well said. I think I very much aligned with the Ethereum ethos to some extent, right? I think that the whole sort of freedom, decentralization point of view. I think anti sort of government, and I think that's been mentioned quite a few times. But if you think about it, if there is no ETH, there is no punks. So in some ways, a bet on punks is actually a bet on ETH. I truly sort of believe that, and I think you sort of said it really well. And if you could pass on a message to the next owner of your punk, what would you like to say to them?
It's a good question. So in that case, I will need to think about passing on a message to my daughter because, as mentioned before, ideally she will be inheriting that. And that message would be that this is something to inherit to the next generation as well. Something, where I believe or I would value it that some things of value and history, if you are able to hold that within your family as like even a family relict, particularly if it has some sort of like historic significance, I think is pretty cool. And if I just imagine that some generations down the line, somebody's rocking that PFP and it's like, it was Artus back in the day when everything started. This is how we have that punk and how we acquired that punk. And in general, I'm like big family guy. That sounds weird, but yeah, for me, like family is definitely important, and like try and also preserve some family culture over the generations. And I think this is a pretty compelling way to try to accomplish that. And I mean, we have some like historic artifacts from a few generations also in our house, and every time like I look at it, I'm like pretty amazing that we still have it, and a way of kind of reminding yourself also of like your ancestors and the other generations. So tying that to my punk, I think that would be pretty cool.
I think so too. I hope one day, your daughter is old enough, and when she's old enough to inherit this special punk of yours, she can look back and listen to this recording. And obviously, hopefully, she comes on PunkCast one day too, right? And let the story continue. But I think this is the beautiful thing about these NFTs, right? I think they're going to outlast our own personal mortality, which is a beautiful thing. And so, Artus, this was super fun unwrapping your punk story. Thank you so much for your time. And I wish you all the best with Frahm.art, and I'll definitely take a closer look to all the things that you're building. But I guess from your side, any closing comments and questions and best way people can sort of find you and reach out to you?
Sure. So first of all, really appreciate being here on PunkCast. I've listened to many great episodes before, and they're really, really happy to have that opportunity to chat. If you want to find me, connect with me on Twitter, Artus Van Frahm, or just Artus on Twitter. If you want to learn more about Frahm, our website is Frahm.art, and Frahm is actually a name of mix between the German word for frame, Rahmen, and the English word for frame. Yeah, check out our platform, set up your own gallery, try to create a custom frame. And if you want to learn more, feel free to contact me. I'm happy to chat.
Awesome. And guys, that wraps up another episode of PunkCast for the week. And we'll be back next week with another punk. Bye for now.